pleasure to be with you here today on this very special occasion. Ladies and gentlemen, imagine with me the figure of Judge Gale standing on this spot in 1852. It was a warm autumn day, not unlike today. A westerly breeze cooled his brow, and prairie grasses bent in the wind around him. He had spent the last several days on horseback, riding judicial circuit, but he was not eager to return to his new lacrosse home. He surveyed the scene around him, flat expanses of grassland ideal for agriculture, a strong creek flowing nearby that could power a mill and give life to a new community. No, this was to be his new home. 35 years earlier, in November of 1816, George Gale was born on the banks of Lake Champlain near Burlington, Vermont. He was a third-generation Vermonter. His grandfather, Peter Gale, having settled there after serving as a soldier in the Revolutionary Army and Continental Army. George's parents had a farm in the foothills of the Green Mountains, and he spent his boyhood there, working the land and attending the local common school. For all of his accomplishments later in life, and for all of his contributions to academia and education, one might expect that George Gale was a bright and ambitious young student. His family records, however, tell us otherwise. Young George spent the idle days of his youth along the banks of mountain streams, fishing for trout, and combing long, rolling grasslands, hunting for pheasant with his dog at his side. At age 16, however, that carefree attitude changed. That summer, a neighbor lent George a book. It was Walter Scott's The Life of Napoleon Bonaparte. To say that that book inspired him would be a gross understatement. No, that book lit a fire within him. For the next few years, Gale devoted every spare moment to expanding his knowledge. He read every scholarly work he could find, books on chemistry, history, geology, and the arts. He sought out a treatise on land surveying, and he taught himself that trade. At 23, Gale studied law in Waterbury, Vermont. 2 years later, in 1841, Gale was admitted to the bar. He traveled west to the Wisconsin Territory to begin his practice. He settled in Elkhorn, Wisconsin, which was soon to be the county seat for Walworth County. While in Elkhorn, Gale was very active in his community. He founded and edited the county's first newspaper, the Western Star. He served as chairman of both the Walworth Town and County boards. In his personal life, Gale married Gertrude Young in 1844, and 1 year later, they had their first child, George Jr. It was during this period, in the mid-1840s, that Gale made his first major contributions to Wisconsin law. In 1846, Gale published the first edition of the Wisconsin Form Book. This book contained 348 pages of legal forms, along with notes and explanations for their use. This book served two very important purposes. First, it helped to standardize the practice of law. Gale's form served as a benchmark in courts across the territory of Wisconsin. Second, his book made the law accessible to non-lawyers. Gale intended that his form book be used by anyone that would come into contact with the courts, from police officers to elected officials to business people. Gale published 4 editions. He went on to publish 4 editions of his form book and sold over 6,000 copies. Publication of his form book in 1846 marked a turning point in Gale's career. The following year, Gale was elected to the Wisconsin Constitutional Convention. That is to say, he and others drafted our state's constitution. That same year, 1847, Gale was elected district attorney of Walworth County. 2 years later, he was elected to the state senate. In 1851, during his second and final year as senator, the governor appointed him brigadier general of the militia. After his Senate term, the 35-year-old Gale resettled in La Crosse. It was here that in 1852, Judge George Gale, first took the bench. As the man who quite literally wrote the book on Wisconsin law, Judge Gale's demeanor on the bench was legendary. He refused to suffer the arguments presented by ill-prepared or ill-mannered attorneys. One oft-repeated historical account tells of an encounter with a brash local attorney who challenged Judge Gale's legal expertise. After a contentious and increasingly heated exchange about just who understood the law, the judge made a bet with the attorney. Whomever prevailed would pay the other $50. Faced with the prospect of losing nearly $1,500 in today's money, the lawyer scrambled to back out of his argument as the gallery laughed aloud. Now, ladies and gentlemen, as a new lawyer myself, I can assure you that challenging a judge's authority in 2014 is just as foolish today as it was in 1852. La Crosse was Judge Gale's new home in more ways than one. The city had been platted the same year that he arrived. 10 years prior, La Crosse had little more than a temporary trading post managed by Nathan Myrick. Although in 1851, La Crosse's population was growing rapidly, its residents and its leaders retained a frontier mentality. Thus, when Gale petitioned the landed gentry for 10 acres upon which to build an institute of higher education, they turned him a deaf ear. Judge Gale wanted more for the people of western Wisconsin than their leaders would allow. More even than the citizens would allow themselves. He knew that the residents of this new state could do more than merely survive. They could thrive. He recognized that Wisconsin was at that moment at a turning point. But how to make that turn? His fellow community leaders had roundly rejected his proposal for a university. His peers had slammed shut the door to development in La Crosse. True to his training as a brigadier general, Judge Gale outflanked his opponents. Not only would Gale build his college outside of La Crosse, he would build an entirely new city to rival La Crosse. Judge Gale knew just the place. In 1853, he purchased 2,000 acres of land on the edge of what was then Buffalo County. Gale knew, however, that a far-flung little town would not provide a suitable home for his school. He needed his town to be a county seat. But again, how? Buffalo County had just been created. Well, during his time in the Senate, Judge Gale had earned the respect and the camaraderie of his fellow lawmakers. In 1854, Judge Gale called in his favors. He convinced lawmakers to form a new county, Trempealeau, from portions of Buffalo, Jackson, and La Crosse counties. Of course, the newly formed village of Galesville was named as the county seat. In the same session, Gale secured the charter for his community's crown jewel, Galesville University. Judge Gale was personally involved in nearly every aspect of his new community. As a self-trained surveyor, Gale platted this village personally. The Beaver Creek provided the town with water and power from mills, both saw and flour. By the time Galesville University opened its doors in 1859, Galesville was already a prosperous, bustling community. It seems to be without question that Judge Gale was proudest of his accomplishments with Galesville University. The institution embodied Gale's progressive ideals. In the 1850s, the road to higher education was riddled with obstacles. For example, most universities of the era prohibited women from enrolling. Others refused admission to members of particular religious groups. Additionally, even for those who could gain access to universities, the cost of university education was extraordinarily high. Gale's University, however, tore down these barriers. The university was coeducational from the start. Its charter stated specifically that no political or religious opinion shall be required as a qualification for membership in the university, and no student shall be required to attend worship with any particular denomination. This was certainly progressive policy in its day. Finally, Galesville University addressed the financial barriers to entry by providing some of its students with scholarships. From its inception in 1865, Gale served as the institution's president. The university's early years were marked with financial strain. In 1857, 3 years after its charter, the university still lacked a building of its own. Gale felt the construction could be delayed no longer. He sought out patronage from the United Methodist Church, which accepted his offer. Construction on this very site began that year. The scope of the university was ambitious. It was to offer 6 departments: a normal and primary department, a scientific and classical department, a department for agriculture and mechanics, a law department, a medical department, and a theological department. In the spring of 1859, 16 students comprised her first class. By that summer, Galesville University boasted a class of 50 students. To put that in perspective, consider the following. That same year, Wisconsin's other college, a little university located in Madison, had an enrollment of only 45 students. Unfortunately, trouble was on the horizon. By 1861, the Civil War had begun. Class sizes dwindled as young men went to battle for the Union. Judge Gale, too, heard the call of duty. In addition to serving as militia's brigadier general, he served as the director of the Sanitation Commission, an organization similar to the modern-day Red Cross. In 1863, Judge Gale commanded a sanitary commission depot at the siege of Charleston Harbor. It was here that he contracted malaria, which troubled him for his remaining years. Another civil war was taking place at Galesville University. This one was between the Methodist patrons and Judge Gale himself. In 1865, Gale stepped down from his presidency, but remained on his faculty. Gale's scholarly work was not confined to the university setting. He wrote essays and articles for scholarly publications and popular publications alike. He wrote epic, highly respected papers on the Chippewa Nation and on the development of civilization in western Wisconsin. His work led to his appointment as vice president of the State Historical Society. In the spring of 1968, Judge Gale passed away at the young age of 52. Complications from his earlier bout with malaria led to his demise. Despite his untimely death, Gale's legacy lives on in myriad ways. Through the state constitution he helped draft, through the county in which we find ourselves today and in which many of us live, through his work in education, through his gift of this beautiful facility behind us. Judge Gale was not just a visionary, but he was also a doer. I'm pleased to know that his spirit lives on today. The spirit lives on in those who worked tirelessly to revitalize this beautiful facility. It lives on in those who made this beautiful tribute to Judge Gale and made this possible, specifically the generosity of the Coop family. Please join me in thanking the Coops and all those involved with the Old Main Enterprise for making this possible.